Okay, so we've learned what GMOs are, we've learned about their impact to human health, which there really isn't any, and to the environment, which there is a lot of. And so the last part that we'll talk about related to GMOs is how countries around the world regulate GMOs. Now this video is mostly going to focus on the United States, that's what I have the most experience with, but I do bring up a couple of different countries as well. So this map is overwhelming, so let's break this down. This is looking at a global map, and this is looking at kind of general GMO policies. So there's 3 different colors. Let's talk about the colors first. So green is growing biotech, meaning they're growing GMOs. And they also allow imports of GMOs. So they'll buy them from other countries and bring them to the country. So again, all the countries you see in green are those that grow GMOs as well as import them. Now up here, this is giving you the same information but by the numbers. So there are 26 green countries on this map that are growing GMOs. Now I will note this data is from 2016. There likely is more relevant data. I recorded this video in 2024 and this was the most recent thing I could find. So know that this has probably changed. So there's 26 countries that are growing GMOs, and 19 of those are developing countries. As I've mentioned in earlier videos, the ability for GMOs to create such a higher output of crops is critically important, particularly from areas of the world that either don't have great agriculture because their land or climate don't propagate it, or just areas around the world that have such a vastly growing population that they're resulting in food shortages. So GMO technology is really incredibly powerful. So 26 countries are growing them, 19 of which are developing countries. Now, if we look at the map, the other thing that's being shown is the GMO crops that are being grown. Again, this is dated, so I'm sure this has expanded since then. And something you might notice, especially if you look at the key down here, is there's only 10 GMO crops, and there are more, but 10. Now, some of these might have multiple GMOs, and what I mean by that is, particularly with corn and soybean, there's not just one GMO corn. There might be lots of different GMO varieties of corn that do different things. Now in the United States, for example, we've got corn, we've got soybean, we got beets. We nearly have everything, but I'm focusing on those. A lot of these then get refined. Corn syrup is from GMO corn. Sugar is from GMO sugar beets usually. There is sugar cane, but here in the US we don't grow that. The point is that a lot of the GMOs you and I eat very rarely are for direct consumption. In the United States, there is GMO papaya. It's actually used to combat a disease that was infecting papaya. That's one of the very few crops that when you go to the grocery store and you buy, you directly eat it. Now, you eat sugar, you eat corn syrup, but I'm hoping you're not eating those directly. That's usually part of other ingredients. So this is kind of a common misconception. People think, oh, this apple is a GMO. Probably not. Very few of our direct consumption fruits and vegetables are GMO. The other thing too about GMOs, and this isn't on this map, but a lot of these foods, particularly corn and soybean, is used for animals, for livestock. And I honestly can't remember the number right now, but it is a majority. A majority of GMOs grown are for livestock. So the food that we give our pigs, our cows, our chickens, that's usually who's getting that direct consumption, not humans. And this makes sense. To feed, let's use corn, to feed corn to a chicken and then chicken to humans uses a lot more corn than if you and I just ate the corn directly. And I have an old video that I'll link in the comments that kind of talks about this energy transfer and kind of explains why that is true. So we have all these GMOs mostly going to livestock. Some of it also goes to biofuels. So if you think about ethanol that gets used in our gasoline, as well as actual just straight up biofuel. And then very little of it is actually direct human consumption. Okay, so that kind of explains the symbols and explains the green. In orange, these are countries that do not grow GMOs, but import them. So while they won't grow the GMOs on their own land, they will buy GMOs from other countries that are growing them on their land. And you'll notice most of that is concentrated in the EU, the European Union. Not all members of the EU, but most of the EU is not growing, but they are importing, as well as some other countries around the world as well. So a couple in Asia, a couple in Africa, but mostly congregated in Europe. Now this gives us a clue. This tells us something about the safety of GMOs, or not safety of GMOs. Earlier, and maybe you already knew this, the European Union is a lot more strict when it comes to human health. And what I mean by that is for chemicals such as shampoo to get approved, companies have to do a lot of work to prove that it is safe in the short term and the long term, which we do not do here in the United States. So the standard of safety in the EU is a lot higher than it is here in the States. Now, if we keep that standard in mind, we see they're like, yeah, we'll import them, we'll sell them to our customers, because even the EU recognizes that GMOs do not have a negative impact to human health, but they don't allow them to be grown in their country because they do recognize the environmental impacts of GMOs. And this, I mean, honestly, in my opinion, this map is like the strongest evidence for that. Here's a country that has a whole lot higher standards for human health and safety. They're letting people eat GMOs. They just don't want to grow them in their own backyard. And then finally, the countries in blue are those kind of coming in. They're like, hey, we're interested in GMO technology. We're thinking about planting them. Let's try it on the small scale and see how it goes. There's probably a lot more to this. You can pause this video and read this more, but I would say those are kind of the top highlights of things you can get out of this map. So this is what growing GMOs looks like. Now let's talk about something very similar, but about how we label GMOs, and particularly labeling GMOs for human consumption. So this is looking at labeling laws. Green is pretty much saying like everything that has a GMO is labeled, no exceptions. The medium green is pretty much everything gets labeled, but the threshold of when something needs a label is a little bit higher. And then the light green is there are labeling laws, but there's a ton of different exemptions, and the Center for Food Safety determined that those laws are kind of when it comes to labeling GMOs. And when we talk about the United States, you're going to see what I mean. Now, something you'll notice is there's actually a lot of overlap with this map and the previous map. Pretty much all countries, well, most countries that grow GMOs have a GMO labeling law. Those that import them, pretty much all the ones that import them, have strong labeling laws. The ones in dark green are the same ones that are in orange here. I'm sure, yeah, it looks like there's a couple exceptions, but for the most part, if they're orange, saying, hey, we'll import them but not grow them, they for sure want them to be labeled. So that's really the biggest kind of takeaway from this, is those that aren't growing it have stronger labeling laws, even if they're importing them. So let's take a closer look at the United States, which was light green on this map, meaning, yes, we have laws, but they're not really that strong. So GMO labeling in the United States is actually very recent. So to kind of talk about the history of like how these bills become laws, so Congress passed a labeling law, and in 2016, President Obama signed it. Now, just because he signed it into law didn't make it immediately go into effect. The USDA, or the United States Department of Agriculture, had to finalize all of the rules. So what does the label look like? What products have to be labeled? How does it get labeled? By the end of 2018. So essentially, this organization had 2 years to figure out how the labeling law would work. Once they figured that out, they gave companies 4 years to start to comply with it. And as of January 2022, all companies now have to label their foodstuffs that have GMOs in them. But it's not that simple. And this is why United States is light green on that previous map. So they're not actually required to label it as GMO. The USDA is rebranding it to be bioengineered, or they can use BE for short. Though on all the labels I've seen, I haven't seen anyone use BE. So here's a box of Lucky Charms to give you an idea of what this looks like. You notice at the very end of the ingredients list, in the same size font as the ingredients list, contains bioengineered food ingredients. So they don't use the term GMO. Why? Well, that's anyone's guess. One guess could be that GMO has such a negative connotation in the news and in the media that USDA wanted to rebrand it so that it didn't sound as scary. Though to me, bioengineered sounds worse, but who knows? The other side of it, I could see people arguing, and I don't know, so I don't want to say one way or the other, but it could be that because GMO has a negative impact, that companies were pushing against the USDA from using the term GMO because they didn't want their sales to suffer. Again, I don't know. Honestly, it could be a blend of everything, but the point is they don't have to be labeled as GMOs. They get labeled as bioengineered. Now, how they relay this information differs. So it could be text. That's what this Lucky Charms label is. It's just a text statement saying this. It could be a symbol. So here on the right-hand side are 3 different symbols that companies can use. And if you recall from your own food packages, the USDA organic symbol, which usually is a beacon for better quality food, no pesticides, no fertilizers, is more plain than the bioengineered symbol. And if you're like, I can't imagine it, go find an organic symbol and compare it to this. So this bioengineered symbol can be used. And I don't know about y'all, but this is like happy. We got sunshine, we got a flower, we got nice sprawling fields. Like this logo was designed to make bioengineering sound better. And I'm not really expressing an opinion either way. Because depending on your viewpoint, you might be like, actually, that is a really good thing. Or you might think, that's actually not a good thing. But this is what the symbol looks like. And it definitely is a positive symbol. Companies can also use an electronic or digital link. And I guess, or text message. I'll add that in there too. So by digital link, we really are talking about QR codes. So they actually don't even have to write bioengineered on the label itself. They can just add a QR code, and as long as it goes to a website that says it's bioengineered, thumbs up, they have met the requirement. Again, we might have different opinions on if this is a good thing or if it's a bad thing. But this helps to explain, if I go back to this map, why the United States is in this light green. Yes, we have a GMO labeling law, but there's a lot of exceptions to it, and depending on how a company decides to label it, might mean nothing. I don't know about y'all. I have never scanned a QR code on my food, right? If I see a granola bar, I'm just buying the granola bar. So some people argue, okay, you're not really conveying that this has GMO ingredients in it because no one practically scans those QR codes. So again, leaving the thoughts and opinions to you. This is just what the law says and how companies can still comply with the law. So with that, again, labeling looks very different around the world. Something I didn't even touch on one of those maps, and feel free to go back through this video to see that map again, is there are some countries in the world that have completely banned the growing and the importation of GMOs. But I wouldn't take too much stock in that. The fact that the EU allows crops to be imported and consumed by their populations, to me is a really strong signal that for human health, GMOs are fine. They're okay. But they don't allow them to be grown, which again to me shows, hey, they care about the environmental impacts of GMOs. In the United States, we do have a law, but it's really easy to kind of circumvent it and still not convey that something has GMOs, even if they are in a convoluted way.